Let's talk about a moment in time, January 7th, 2026, when a single fatal shooting on a Minneapolis street corner became a national flashpoint. The death of Renee Good at the hands of a federal agent wasn't just some local tragedy. Oh no, it ignited an absolute firestorm over lethal force, federal power, and really, the very definition of truth itself.
This one quote from Renee Good's wife, Becca, it just says it all, doesn't it? We had whistles, they had guns. It perfectly captures this huge imbalance of power on that snowy morning. It paints this picture of a community just trying to watch out for its neighbors, armed with nothing more than whistles, and being met with the deadly force of a massive federal operation.
So, to really get what happened, we need to go right to that specific time and place. Picture this. It's a cold Wednesday morning in South Minneapolis. A huge federal immigration crackdown is going down, and you can just feel the tension. The whole city is on edge.
And this timeline, it shows just how terrifyingly fast an ordinary morning can turn into a tragedy. The day before this massive operation, Metro Surge drops 2,000 federal agents into the city. The very next morning, Renee Good does something completely normal. She drops her son at school, and then she just stops to act as a community observer. Minutes later, by 9:37 a.m., she's been shot and killed.
And you can't talk about this story without talking about where it happened. The weight of history here is just immense. This shooting didn't happen in a vacuum. It took place just a few blocks from the corner where George Floyd was murdered, a spot that's become a global symbol of police violence and, for this community, a place of really deep, raw trauma.
So, who was this woman at the center of the storm? Well, Renee Nicole Good was a 37-year-old American citizen. She was a mother of three and a celebrated award-winning poet. She and her family had actually moved to Minneapolis looking for a safer, more inclusive community. And this part is absolutely crucial. She was not a target of the raid. She was there simply watching over her neighbors.
And this is where things get really complicated, because almost immediately after the shooting, two completely opposite stories started to take shape. And we're not just talking about a disagreement over a few details. This was a full-blown battle over the fundamental reality of what happened on that street.
On one side, you've got the federal narrative. This was self-defense against a violent rioter who weaponized her vehicle in an act of domestic terrorism. And on the other side, the local narrative. This was the killing of an unarmed community observer who was just trying to drive away from a threatening situation, a reckless use of lethal force. I mean, those two versions just cannot exist in the same reality.
In the federal government's position, it was laid out in the harshest terms possible by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Just listen to the language here. She didn't just defend her agent. She immediately branded a U.S. citizen a domestic terrorist. She framed the whole thing as a direct attack on law and order.
But the city? They fired back, and they didn't mince words. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, said he'd seen bystander video and just flatly rejected the federal account. His raw, angry dismissal didn't just question the facts. It really exposed this complete and total breakdown of trust between local and federal authorities.
So, with two official stories that just can't both be true, bystander videos became the critical piece of evidence. So let's put all the rhetoric and the spin aside for a minute and just look at what the forensic analysis of that footage actually shows us.
When you break down that footage frame by frame, a very different picture starts to form. Investigators found that Good's steering wheel was turned sharply away from the agent before he fired. The agent himself, Jonathan Ross, wasn't hit, he wasn't run over, he stayed on his feet the whole time. You can hear conflicting orders being screamed at Good: get out, drive away, an impossible, chaotic situation. And maybe the most disturbing part, federal agents on the scene actively blocked a physician from giving medical aid for 6 critical minutes after the shooting.
0.7 seconds. Think about that. That's how long it took for the agent to fire 3 shots. That is an incredibly fast, almost reflexive action. And it raises some serious questions about whether this was a conscious decision or a split-second reaction that was fueled by something else entirely.
And that something else, well, it could be this. To understand the agent's mindset, this piece of context is absolutely vital. Just 6 months before this incident, Jonathan Ross had been through something incredibly traumatic. He was dragged by a suspect's car for 300 feet. Analysts have suggested this history could have created a kind of hypervigilance, meaning he might have been reacting not just to the threat in front of him, but to the memory of the trauma behind him.
The source material gives us this really powerful analogy to help put all these pieces together. It's called the glass of water on a vibrating table. So Operation Metro Surge, that's the vibrating table. It created this constant state of high tension all over the city. The agent's unresolved trauma? That made the glass of water unstable, filled right to the brim. And in this view, Renee Good's decision to drive away was just that final little jolt that caused the whole fragile setup to shatter.
So as you can imagine, the shooting of Renee Good did not stay a street corner incident for long. It escalated, and fast, into a national crisis. The ripple effect was immediate, it was widespread, and it touched every single level of American society and government.
The aftermath was, well, it was chaos. Protests erupted all over the country, from Minneapolis to New York City. The FBI swooped in and seized all the evidence, which effectively shut out local investigators and just fueled accusations of a cover-up. The governor put the National Guard on alert. At the same time, public support for Good's family was just overwhelming. A GoFundMe raised over $1.5 million in just a few days. And in response to all this unrest, the Department of Homeland Security sent hundreds more agents into the city, which just poured gasoline on the fire.
For the community on the ground, the story was simple, and it was tragic. This quote from Jelani Hussein of CARE, Minnesota really captures how people were remembering Renee Good, not as a rioter, but as a martyr, a peaceful neighbor who died trying to do the right thing for the people she lived with.
And of course, those shockwaves slammed right into Washington, D.C. The shooting immediately became a centerpiece in the huge fight over DHS funding. It sparked calls to impeach Secretary Noem and led to new legislation to try and rein in ICE tactics and finally require body cameras. You know, this event didn't create the rift between federal and local governments, but it sure exposed it and made it deeper than ever before.
So in the end, this whole tragic story leaves us wrestling with a really tough question. When a massive federal operation comes into a local neighborhood, when national policy plays out on a city street, who gets to draw the line? Who decides where order ends and where justice begins?